More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. Across the country, there are 63 national parks and thousands of miles of wilderness, which is exactly what lifelong friends Brendan Hall and Anthony Blake wanted to explore. So they set out on a 10,000-mile journey through the national park system, which would end up changing their lives. And now that the journey has been made into a documentary, which is appropriately titled Out There, a National Park Story. And the filmmaker, Brendan Hall, is joining us now to talk more. Brendan, nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So tell us a bit about the film itself.
Yeah, so this film, as a filmmaker, is like my white whale labor of love. It was crafted over the course of 7 years. I'm the director, cinematographer, and editor, and then I made it with my childhood friend Anthony, who's an educator and an assistant principal at a high school in Connecticut. And as you mentioned, it follows our road trip through the parks, but it's all to meet people along the way. So it's kind of a big awe and wonder tapestry of human stories. And it's all to kind of share this love that people have for the parks and learn more through their perspectives.
So you said this took 7 years. I'm assuming the actual 10,000-mile journey didn't take 7 years. So tell me about the road trip itself that the two of you took and how long that took.
Yeah, I mean, wow, with the number of parks we went to, it almost felt like 7 years. But we accomplished it kind of over the course of an initial summer, just when we were out of college, over 3 or 4 months. So it was the centennial year of the National Park Service. And we had grown up on the East Coast and had fallen in love with this idea of parks. And so our dream was to start in Acadia, which was kind of the farthest east national park, and go all the way across the country to as many as we could. And so the film features, I think, over 20 national parks, which was a lot. I mean, we were moving really fast, but covered as much ground as possible. And then the rest of those years were spent as a filmmaker, editing, getting a little bit of additional footage. And I won't spoil it, but it has a really special ending that happened just about a year ago. So it kind of ends on a more modern note too.
So I think it's interesting that the two of you are from the East Coast, and as you said, you kind of fell in love with the national parks. I'm curious about when you were traveling, kind of what you learned maybe from folks who aren't from the East Coast, because being born and raised on the West Coast, I think it is almost part of our DNA when it comes to national parks, when it comes to public lands. In a way that sometimes I always wonder, well, do people from the East Coast get this? Because you just don't have the expanse of land that we have in the West.
Yeah, it's so true. And actually, I was really lucky. I have a profound connection to Idaho because my family's been coming to Sun Valley for over 60 years. And so growing up, my grandmother actually lived in Sun Valley for my whole life. So I'd come out in the summers, come out in the winters, and I largely credit, Idaho, the Sawtooth Mountains and Craters of the Moon and Stanley and Sun Valley is really building my foundational love of nature, seeing mountains and wildflowers and preserved tracts of land. And so I agree, especially like in parts of the East Coast. I live in Brooklyn. It's very hard to imagine kind of the scope of nature and the beauty of a place like this. And moving through the country, through the different national parks, it was just amazing to see how many different ecosystems they preserve. There's this like magic to driving across the country where you start with the low-lying like lands and hills of the East Coast and go through Shenandoah and those mountains, kind of on endless flat roads till you get out west. And there's a moment in the film of us first seeing the Rockies and the Tetons and our jaws just dropping. And it really felt like entering the gateway to something really reverent. So, I often say that Idaho is kind of the most underknown and underrated state in the country in terms of nature, but I think it's maybe the best kept American secret. So maybe we should keep it that way.
A lot of people would agree with that. So why do you think spaces like this are really critical to the culture, not just of our country, but of our states? I mean, because I agree with you with Idaho, is that there is such tremendous beauty here, and we are so lucky to have the public lands that we have. But as you well know, public lands are being threatened.
Definitely. Yeah. And what I'm really excited to bring this week is we just screened my film last night in Haley. And then next week on Monday and Wednesday, we're screening in Twin Falls on Monday, and then Wednesday in Boise. We'll be at the
Hmm.
Orpheum Theater on Monday and the Egyptian Theater on Wednesday. Both are evening events. And I mentioned those two because they were kind of presented and brought to the state by Friends of Minidoka. And so they are the Friends group that protects the Minidoka National Historic Site, a site of Japanese incarceration of Americans during World War II. And they're a really great example of what you're touching on is that these national parks preserve beautiful lands, but they also preserve our human experiences and our
Hmm.
connections with others, our connections with strangers, as well as the interpretation and preservation of these really important American histories. And so we saw that time and time again, through indigenous histories, through climate change, through kind of history like Minidoka's site, protecting and preserving stories through World War II. These are places of American heritage, and it's so important to learn all of those different sides of that. And so I think that's why people have this profound connection to parks. It's a preservation of kind of this American spirit, as well as just a beautiful place to go and explore and find a piece of yourself, which is why we called it out there. It's like what's out there for you beyond your comfort zone,
Mm.
and how do these parks help create that space for people?
Do you think that this journey changed you in any ways or maybe expanded your thoughts about the country, about our citizenship?
Yeah, it was deeply transformative for me. And I've been someone, I grew up with big Fourth of July parades and a lot of national pride in our community. And for me, getting to meet all these amazing people in the parks and really diverse people, different stories, different reasons they came here, but all with this kind of spirit of empathy and kinship and just a love for these lands and this place. I really think we can look towards that as a country. I think that we're in really hard times, but there's a healthy way to have pride for the spirit that we all have and we can bring to these
Mm.
places and like both preserve our backyards and our country at large. And so for me personally, like I never expected so many years after our original trip to want to be such an advocate for parks and for
Hmm.
nature. It's what I'm spending so much of my time doing this year. But it's really felt like the right thing to do. And we're in this year where national parks are very much being threatened, funding cuts, staffing cuts. And I think it's really important for all of us to look nationally, but also just preserve these parks we have locally, the Sawtooth Mountains and all these amazing places, Minidoka, that we can just bring great energy to and preserve and explore and make our own home states a little bit better. I think if we all can do that, then nationally, our
Yeah.
country will get back to that place of pride that a lot of us want to feel. So.
I have just under a minute left with you. Do you have a favorite park or a park that surprised you the
I
most?
obviously have to plug Idaho. I love the Idaho parks so much. I'm kind of preferential right now, actually, to Yosemite. I've had a few really amazing experiences there in the past year. And
Hmm.
just last month, I actually proposed to my girlfriend and who now
Oh,
fiance. So Gabby makes films with me, and we returned to El Capitan Meadow, which was amazing. And then
yeah.
in out there, there's a French Vietnamese photographer is one of our main characters, and he actually took engagement photos of us on his big, large format kind of Ansel Adams film camera. And so,
I love
yeah,
that.
it's just an example of how falling in love with something can lead you to so many places you don't expect. And so, first falling in love with parks almost a decade ago in college, I could have never imagined I'd then be proposing in one.
Well, I want to thank you so much. We've been speaking with Brandon Hall, the filmmaker of Out There, a National Park Story. The screening at the Egyptian Theater in Boise will be May 7th. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.